Good evening. Thank you for joining us on Straight Talk. Our guest this evening is Legislative Councillor Professor Lau Chi-Pang. Professor Lau is a professor of the Department of History at Lingnan University. He's also a member of the 14th CPPCC and has served on several government advisory boards and councils, including the Hung Yee Kuk. The reclamation of the粉嶺golf course has been in the news again lately, so it seems appropriate that we have Professor Lau to share with us an overview of the current situation. He is very qualified to do this as a LegCo member, and his significant experience on Town Planning Board and Advisory Council on the Environment, as well as his expertise as a historian. Welcome, CP.
Hi, Eugene.
So, CP, as we know, Hong Kong is well known for having the most unaffordable housing market.
Oh, yeah.
And inadequate housing supply is one of the community's major concerns. The average waiting time for public housing now is still 5.3 years,
Yep.
and there are like 230,000 people still on the waiting list. When the former Secretary for Housing, Mr. Frank Chan, was here last year, he told us the government has identified 350 hectares of land to build 300,000 flats over the next 10 years.
Yep.
And then the current Secretary for Housing, Ms. Winnie Ho, was on our show last September, and she reiterated that the 10-year plan, which includes the reclamation of the 32 hectares of the 172 hectares of the粉嶺golf course,
Right.
almost a fifth of the current golf course.
Right.
So we know that the government needs the land, but why do we choose this existing spot ground that is, I think, over a century old?
Yeah, yes. Well, the issue came up with the debate on whether we would like to remove or relocate villages in the northeast of the new territories under this new development area plan. And so there's a debate in LegCo years ago. And then they conclude that, reclaiming land from this golf club would be easier, and there's no risk of relocating anybody out of their residency. So that's the issue.
So basically, it's a so-called ease of convenience, or easier to make this happen in a quicker way.
Yes, or a misconception of the whole issue that the issue is supposed to be we need more land to build more housing for people. So this is the research question. So the answer would be to look for lands, right? But then the research question has been we decided to, do we agree to build houses on this piece of golf course?
Right.
Yes or no?
Okay. As I said earlier, they are planning to use 32 hectares of the land out of the 172. So can you remind the viewers how the government uses 32 hectares of land? I mean, how many people will be planned to be able to move into this one is built, and how long would that take?
Well, the plan is to provide housing for 30-some thousand people with 12,000 flats, something like that. But the whole thing is now trimmed down to getting just 8 to 9 hectares of that 32, which is a small corner of the whole piece of land to do the housing project.
Right. So when they take away 1/5 of the course,
right,
and using one small corner, so what are they going to use of the remaining, the larger part of the golf course that they will be reclaimed?
Well, I would suppose originally the whole thing, 32 acres, to be used for housing. But then it came up that the ecological issue doesn't allow the government to go for the whole piece of land, because most of the land are of high ecological value.
Right. You just mentioned 12,000 flats.
Yeah.
Out of the figures I mentioned earlier, 300,000 needed.
Right.
It's slightly less than 5%. Is it cost effective to so-called, someone says, to destroy an existing golf course and to have this gain of housing? In your opinion, do you agree?
Well, I think I cannot agree with that, because what I learned from my service at the Town Planning Board is that we don't usually allow something that is still in use to be changed for another use. So this is a golf course which is recreational use, and then we take this part of land and then change it to residential. This is something that we need to consider very carefully.
Right. What has been the response from the public? I mean, because as we know, everybody wants to have more housing for everybody, which is a common consensus. But what has the response from the public about reclaiming the golf course?
Well, I think the question is that whether the public would like to have more housing, which is now the issue or the focus of the question, whether the golf course has to be retained or to be reclaimed for housing. That's another issue. If you ask the public whether we want more public housing for Hong Kong, I would expect the answer would be yes, of course, why not?
I understand that I've heard from the grapevine that there are over like 6,000 letters writing to the town planning board objecting to this. So what type of objection do you anticipate for them to raise?
Well, I guess most of them would be like, well, we have a lot of land in the new territories. You don't have to spare that small triangle that's corner for a very densely populated public housing development, and also there are alternatives. There are alternatives that could provide more housing.
Right, we can talk about that in a minute. I mean, I'm trying to bring out different views from that I gather information when I do the research on this area. Some actually even portray that they call it like a class struggle, sort of between the fighting the wants, so-called for the privilege, versus those that maybe from the lower income sector, maybe the have and have-nots. So are you worried that this might actually create even more rivalry within our community?
Of course.
Especially now we are trying to rebuild after what has gone through so painfully in the last 3 years.
Yes, that's what exactly I'm worrying about. Because when the issue came up 5-6 years ago, it was something like a class struggle or political struggle between the Democrat and the pro-government. So I would say if the housing project is to be carried on, there will be a sort of a monumental evidence showing this class struggle in Hong Kong.
Right. Since you mentioned about the pandemics and the pro-government, is some sort of a term that we haven't heard for quite some time. And in the current Legislative Council, what would you anticipate all your colleagues will take this view? Will they be having that sort of that attitude to sort of fight for so-called an equality?
Well, I think currently I can anticipate that or envisage that most of our colleagues at Ecological would not agree to this housing project because it destroys the whole recreational development in the new territories, this heritage, and Fanning Golf Course is the first recreational facility in the new territories, when a whole piece of land was leased to Britain in 1898.
Right. So, Jipang, I also done some homework on the ecology consultant AEC report. It said this is the most ecologically important non-wetland lowland area remaining in Hong Kong. So, what will be the actual environment impacts if this housing project is going to build on this golf course, if it ever becomes a reality? What will happen?
Well, I think this is going to destroy this ecosystem that has been developed and built here in Fanning for over 100 years. Well, you may say that this is artificial, but then over 100 years, it has become so natural, and then it has become a home for so many species. So I think we need that. In particular, when we talk about Northern Metropolis, we need something that provide us with fresh air, with green, with this balanced ecosystem.
Yeah, they even say there are like up to 83 species of fauna and flora of conservative significance will be affected. And also understand there are like 400 trees on the land that actually qualify for governments of the Register of Old and Valuable Trees.
Yeah.
So will this be endangered if we're ever going to build around that? I mean, how can we maintain the trees if this is going to go ahead? Can it be done?
Well, this is very difficult because, development is also work against ecology. In particular, when we talk about old and valuable trees, you cannot take away one and then plant a new one to replace it.
Yeah, but they have also approved a plan on the condition that an area of woodland is earmarked for preservation.
Oh, yeah.
So is that good enough to preserve the trees and the birds?
Well, of course, that's not good enough, but that's the only way that we can do. We try our very best to protect the area, but that's the last thing that we can do.
But why do we need trees? Sorry to ask you a very direct question.
Well, of course, we need a better life. We need a good environment, and we need trees to provide us with fresh air, pleasant life, and so on and so forth.
Right. Right. Let's take a short break now, and viewers, do stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. We have been talking with Professor Lau Chi-Pang about the government's proposal to reclaim part of the粉嶺golf course and the environmental as well as other concerns that have been raised by the public. So CP, we have touched on all those areas, and you did mention, do we have other alternatives? I think at the time when this was raised, things were very different.
Right.
I mean, the last few years have seen significant changes in the whole landscape of Hong Kong, especially in politics. A lot of people mention the word brownfield sites.
Right.
Will this be easier and take less time to develop and less controversy?
Yes or no, it depends, because we do have some misconception about brownfield sites, because it seems to the public that this is something that is no use. But then most brownfield sites are in use, in operation. So relocating those businesses on brownfield site is an issue. But I can tell you that in the past few years, there's of course the launching of this northern metropolis would be a very, very good opportunity to rethink the land policy, the housing policy in Hong Kong, in particular in the new territories.
Will you call that, since you mentioned a couple of times the Northern Metropolis project, will you call this the solution to all our issues?
Exactly, because it is so huge a project that I would say this is a redevelopment of the new territories in a way.
Right. So in a way, a lot of things concerned we had, a lot of the so-called restrictions we had will be removed if this is going to go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just like this Chinese idiom, this old saying that you don't want to mark the boat to look for that lost sword, right? We marked the boat 5-6 years ago and looking for a solution for housing, or easing this housing problem. But now we have this northern metropolis, and then recently I've learned that villages in the new territories they are more willing to negotiate or to cooperate with the government.
I'm sure you're talking about one of the issues that was raised by your colleague Kenneth Lau about the possibility that they will offer more land for that.
Exactly.
I mean, how many flats will be built if that can come through?
Well, we're talking about 10 times at least the number that is to be built on this corner of this golf course.
You just said a village. That means a whole village?
A whole village to the north of this粉嶺golf course.
Right. So what that means is in a close-by area, a whole village, and on a voluntary basis.
Yeah. Well, it's something like land resumption or even PPP, joining hands of the government and the villages.
Right. Apart from this, I also read from the paper. Sorry, I'm asking you so many reports I read in the papers. They said that there are hundreds of 50-year-old buildings built for civil servants in the past, and they could be redeveloped to provide flats of like over 20,000 flats. And I'm sure their locations will be in already existing residential areas.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know the problem is that because they have to pay the land premium, and they make it sort of not viable for the property developers to go ahead and do this. Any thoughts there? Well,
yes, that's a good point. That given this is a sort of a residential area, so it doesn't have to go for application to the town planning board, and then the government can just take it over and then build public housing on that. So it's an easy way out. You don't have to change this residential area to this recreational area to residential.
Right. Also, some councillors or colleagues have objected to the housing plan, warning that of the traffic jam, as well as a lack of infrastructure to support the influx of this 12,000 flats, like 30,000 people. Is this a valid concern, or is it just an excuse to bring it up because the government can always build more new infrastructure to support this? Maybe it takes some time, but is this a valid concern?
Yes, of course it is. This is something that the whole project is to overcome if it is to be continued, because the traffic impact assessment is an issue for town planning board's consideration. And then if you go to that golf course, you find it very difficult to get your car to the roundabout of Shangshui. And the whole area, like this small tiny area, is packed with roads and a lot of traffic. And then given this fan cam road, which is a pretty old and of course
that's a tree line.
Exactly,
it's very nice road unless you widen it completely.
Very nice. We don't want to change it. We don't want to do anything about that road because it's so beautiful road. We can trace back to 100 years ago. So it's so ridiculous to put 30-some thousand people living in this area and then ask them to commute back and forth daily, which is a huge traffic jam around this roundabout.
Well, CP, let's move on from we talk about the background of this initiative. We talk about the reasons why, but things have changed. And then you said the alternatives, and it sounds like what the new government has portrayed. Mr. John Lee said a new chapter begins. So hopefully everything will change. Let's move on to other areas. Let's not just talk about the alternative land and everything. I mean, our EXCO convener, Virginia Ip, has said that the plan have reflected double standards of the previous administration, and it has pledged to support the sports sector, but didn't seem to support the golf at all. We're already having fewer golf courses than our so-called competitor, Singapore, and we can't afford to lose this in kind of an international city. Do you agree with her? And I'm sure the government will realize this is quite a fact. Why isn't the government addressing this issue? Do they have better plans for development of sport in Hong Kong?
Well, I just can't. I can't agree more because this is a very interesting and weird issue that the government has been avoiding talking about the golf club as part of the sports development of Hong Kong. So I think this is wrong because just in the past few months that look at the World City Championship here, a local golfer, young golfer, win the whole thing, and of course this Hong Kong Open, which is a world-class championship in the region, if not the whole world. So we're working with this cultural sports and tourism bureau to promote sports, but then at the same time we destroy this very important, very of cultural and heritage values golf club in the new territory. So this is something ridiculous.
Right. I must also look at the 14th five-year plan, which I always mention in this show because we try to integrate Hong Kong with the mainland's development. One of our roles is to be the bridge for our country to overseas, and we all know that golf is one of the avenue, and golf is one of the few sport that people actually travel internationally. So I'm sure we might get some golfers traveling to Hong Kong. Another EXCO member, Ronnie Tong, has said that golf courses attract professionals and investors to Hong Kong. Do you think the government has taken this into consideration?
Not at all, because as I just mentioned, that the whole issue has been in a way hijacked by this political debate many years ago at Ecological. And then, of course, when you talk about this, I also agree that golf is sort of a soft power to connect the mainland and the rest of the world. And of course, it serves as a venue for all sort of exchanges, including business, political, cultural, all kind of things.
Right. CP, you had many roles. I'm going to ask you, as a historian, I know you have written a book on the Hong Kong Golf Club. And can you tell viewers in short, what is the price to pay from a historian point of view if this is going to go ahead? Because you will know the history behind it. And what sort of impression will so-called destroying a century-old golf courses that's renowned for international tournaments that will have on Hong Kong, from your point of view?
Well, we've been doing this thing of taking away historic sites one after another since many years ago. And then when we do this, when we build public housing on this golf course, we're taking away another, which is so important to Hong Kong.
So that means if this is going to go ahead, I'm sure we'll, with all the public sort of responses, is possible that it will reflect not very positively on our government on this, for example.
Yeah.
What if the government be able to change this? Do you think it will be a good perception that Hong Kong is back on the world map?
Yeah, of course, and I think this is going to be in line with what we've done in the past few years to change Hong Kong from what we were in the past 10 years, and then we're going to vote for this new chapter. I think this is the way that we answer the call from the public,
right,
that we need something special for Hong Kong.
Right. Sports,
recreation.
CP, as you know, part of the legislative job is to question the work of the government and to debate any issues containing public interest. Now you are a legislative member from the election committee. Will this golf course issue be further deliberated and discussed in LegCo? And how will you bring this forward?
Well, I guess my colleagues or myself perhaps can move a motion debate at LegCo to discuss this further. And of course, when the whole thing is to be continued, they will have to go back to this work panel and then to ask for money. So we have the chance to discuss it anyway.
CP, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. And thank you for sharing all the different perspectives on this issue. I'm sure that will enable all our viewers to make up their own minds as to whether reclaiming part of the Fanling Golf Course is in Hong Kong's best interest. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.